Thanksgiving night in Lake Oswego should have felt warm and golden, the kind of night where families light candles and pass plates of roasted turkey while laughter spills into the halls. But the moment I stepped onto the front porch of the ward house, the cold hit me first. A sharp sting in the air that felt more like a warning than weather. I had not been home in 6 months, not since the last argument where my mother told me I was becoming impossible to defend, and my father suggested I take some time to figure out what I wanted from life. Still, she called that morning with a careful voice and said, Thanksgiving should be spent with family and that it was time for us to put things behind us. I believed her. I wanted to believe her so badly that I wore the only decent dress I owned and told myself this would be the night everything softened. As soon as the front door opened, every bit of that hope cracked. The ward foyer glowed with chandeliers and polished wood and the sound of jazz sliding through the air. 40 guests filled the place, all in tailored jackets and silk dresses, glasses raised smiles wide. Right in the center of the room stood my brother Blake, holding his phone up like a reporter grinning at the screen. He looked straight at me, then at whoever was watching his live video, and said, "Watch this." His voice had that familiar edge, the one he used before every humiliation he ever orchestrated when we were kids. Before I could ask what he meant, a few guests turned toward me with those polite smiles people use when they sense trouble but pretend not to. My mother appeared from the dining room, smoothing her pearl necklace and whispering something to a guest before she reached me. "You made it," she said, her tone too bright to be real. Then her eyes flicked to my dress and she added, "I wish you had worn something more festive." It was not even criticism at that point, just habit. My father joined her glass of Pinot Noir in hand, cheeks red from drinking and entertaining. He did not hug me. He did not even pretend. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "Elena is here," everyone in the same tone he would use to announce a spilled drink. Blake lowered his phone and said loudly, "You still living in that sad apartment? Must be tough losing your job right before the holidays." A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one said anything. My face burned. I had not wanted the entire neighborhood to know I had been laid off from the Lake Oswego Public Library when the city cut funding. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but my father cut in first. "You are 33, he said slowly, "and every year you bring us the same story. No stability, no ambition, no results. I cannot do this anymore." Blake stepped closer and gave my shoulder a hard shove, not enough to knock me down, but enough to make me hit the edge of the buffet table. A few glasses rattled. I stared at him in shock because even though he had pushed me many times growing up, he had never done it in front of a room full of witnesses. My mother pressed her hand to her temple and muttered, "If you would stop provoking your brother, he would not act this way." There it was again, the old family script, the one where Blake never did anything wrong and I was always too sensitive, too dramatic, too something. My father set his wine down with a sharp clink. "I think it is time," he said. "Time for you to stand on your own without leaning on us. You have had plenty of chances, Elena. Tonight, we are ending this cycle." He turned and strode toward the coat closet. For one hopeful second, I thought he was getting my coat because he wanted to talk outside privately. But he grabbed my small travel suitcase instead, the one I brought because I thought staying the night might help heal things. He carried it to the door, yanked it open, and threw the suitcase onto the wet stone steps. The sound of it hitting the ground was louder than it should have been. Conversations in the house faded into an uneasy quiet. Then he pointed outside and said, "Get out of this house. Tonight." My mother looked away. Blake lifted his phone again and laughed. "Happy Thanksgiving, loser." I froze. For a moment, I could not feel my fingers or hear the music or breathe in the scented holiday air. It was like the world narrowed into a tunnel made of cold and humiliation and disbelief. When I did not move fast enough, Blake stepped forward as if to drag me out, but he did not need to. My father was already pushing the door closed. The click of the latch locking was soft, almost gentle, but it felt like a punch. Then the porch lights turned off automatically, leaving only the dim yellow glow of the street lamps. I stood there alone in the freezing night, breath trembling, arms wrapped around myself because I had brought no winter coat. Guests inside began talking again, pretending nothing had happened. Through the frosted glass, I saw Blake laughing with someone, probably replaying the footage he had just taken. My suitcase lay on its side on the wet steps collecting melting snow. I picked it up with hands that shook so hard the zipper rattled. The cold sank into my bones quickly, the kind that makes your teeth knock together. Every memory of every time my family had chosen Blake over me rushed through me like a flood. Shock, humiliation, rage, heartbreak, all tangled together. And that was how my Thanksgiving ended. Me alone on the street outside the house where I grew up while everyone inside toasted to family. I dragged my suitcase down the quiet sidewalk of Forest Ridge Lane, the wheels bumping against uneven patches of concrete slick with melting frost. The cold hit harder now that I was away from the porch lights and further into the neighborhood, where tall pine trees blocked what little warmth the street lamps offered. My fingers throbbed in a dull, burning rhythm, the kind that meant they were starting to go numb. I pulled my thin cardigan tighter around myself, even though it did almost nothing to stop the steady wind drifting in from the lake. Every house I passed seemed to glow with the kind of warmth I had never truly known. Through tall windows, I saw families gathered around tables filled with food, people laughing, clinking glasses, passing bowls of stuffing and mashed potatoes, while soft holiday music hummed in the background. The contrast between their world and mine was so sharp it felt like a physical cut across my chest. I tried breathing slowly, hoping it would steady me, but each breath shuddered out of me in a cloud of white. I had nowhere in mind to go. My apartment was on the east side of Portland, too far to walk, and I did not have rideshare money left after paying bills earlier in the month. Even if I could get there, the building felt more like a temporary shelter than a home, and tonight, for the first time in years, I had hoped to feel the comfort of a family table again. I should have known better. The deeper I walked into the neighborhood, the darker everything became. I kept my head down partly to shield my face from the wind, and partly because I could not bear to see one more happy family framed in the window of a house bigger than any library I had ever worked in. Every few blocks, the sidewalk curved, revealing another cluster of homes trimmed with white lights and wreaths. I thought of the Ward house behind me, the chandeliers, and the polished floors, and Blake laughing like my life was entertainment. I could still feel the sting in my shoulder where he shoved me. My boots were too thin, the soles worn from years of buying whatever thrift stores had. After 20 minutes, the cold from the pavement seeped through and my feet felt damp and stiff. I tried to wiggle my toes as I walked, but they moved sluggishly as if wrapped in ice. The cold made my eyes water, and for a moment I thought it was only the wind until a tear slid down my cheek, warmer than the air and bitter in a way I could not swallow. I wiped it quickly, but the memories started anyway. When I was 9, Blake pushed me down the stairs during a game he insisted was fun. I hit my elbow so hard I thought it broke. When I cried, Mom scolded me for being dramatic and made me apologize for ruining Blake's playtime. When I was 12, he locked me outside in the rain because I refused to give him my allowance. Dad came home, saw me soaked, and instead of asking what happened, he told me to stop causing problems for my brother, who needed peace to focus on school. The injustice replayed itself again and again with different scenes, different years, but always the same conclusion. Blake mattered. I did not. Even in adulthood, nothing changed. He became the golden son, the tech genius, the pride of the family. I became the daughter who worked ordinary jobs, lived in modest apartments, and apparently deserved every criticism they threw at me. I sniffed back the cold and kept walking. A few cars passed, but none slowed. People on holidays rarely look at the edges of the road. The weight of my suitcase made my arm ache. I stopped under a dim street lamp and switched it to the other hand, but the metal handle was so cold it felt like it had fused to my skin. I wanted to sit down right there on the curb, but I knew better. The cold would take me faster if I stopped moving. Still, my legs trembled from exhaustion and from the sting of being cast out like I was nothing. I whispered to myself to keep going, just a little farther. My breath fogged out in uneven bursts. The glow from the windows around me kept triggering memories of the Ward dining room when I was 16. Blake got the lead role in the school play, and my parents toasted to his greatness with sparkling cider. That same night, I showed them the essay contest I had won. My mother skimmed it and said, "That is nice, dear," before returning to talk about Blake's rehearsal schedule. That was the night I learned silence was easier than trying to be seen. A gust of wind hit me so hard the branches overhead rattled. I hunched forward instinctively and kept walking. After another turn, the wealthy homes thinned out, and the noise of the party I left behind became nothing more than a faint hum swallowed by distance. I could no longer pretend I was walking with a destination. I was wandering because standing still meant accepting what happened, and I was not ready to feel the full weight of that. My teeth chattered so loudly I imagined people inside their warm homes might hear if they stepped outside. My fingers were swollen and pale, and when I tried flexing them, they responded slowly, each movement stiff. I wondered if my father hesitated at all after shutting the door, if my mother felt even a flicker of guilt. I doubted it. In our family, guilt did not flow backward. I reached the edge of the neighborhood where the sidewalk led to Riverfront Park. The wind shifted sharply as soon as I entered the open pathway. The lake's breath rolled across the ground and wrapped around me like a warning. My body shook in violent spasms for several seconds before settling into a numb trembling. The park was almost empty except for a jogger in a reflective jacket far in the distance and a few scattered lights flickering in the breeze. My suitcase felt heavier than before. I pulled it onto the path leading to a wooden bench under a weak street lamp. Every part of me ached. My chest felt too tight to draw a full breath. My throat burned from swallowed tears and unsaid words. As I reached the bench, my legs nearly buckled. I sank onto the cold, wooden slats, hugging myself as tightly as I could. I stared at my hands and barely recognized them. They were red at the knuckles, whitish at the fingertips. They did not look like the hands of someone who belonged anywhere. Behind me, the lake moved quietly under the moonlight, and the only sound was the wind moving through the trees. That was when I finally whispered to myself a truth that had been building for years. They never wanted me. They never will. The words hung in the cold air just long enough to sting. I pressed my forehead into my palms and let the tears come. The cold had a way of settling into the bones when you sat still too long, and by the time I lifted my head from my trembling hands, the wind slicing across Riverfront Park felt like it was peeling away the last bit of warmth I had left. My breath came out in uneven bursts, each cloud dissolving into the dark like pieces of me drifting away. The wooden bench pressed painfully into the backs of my legs, but I could not bring myself to stand. My body felt heavy, as if every moment of my life that led to this night had anchored itself to my chest. I rubbed my arms for warmth, but the thin cardigan barely shielded me from the freezing air rolling off the lake. I tried to focus on the faint glow of the street lamp above, letting the weak light pull me out of the spiral of thoughts spinning in my mind. It did not work. My mind kept returning to the same questions. How could my father throw me out like that? How could my mother watch? How could Blake laugh? I swallowed hard, tasting salt on my lips from dried tears. A sharp shiver ran through me, and I curled forward again, pulling my knees close as if my body could create its own shield. I knew the signs. My fingers had grown stiff and my thoughts slower. The cold was beginning to slip under my skin. I told myself I would only rest a few minutes before forcing my body to move again, but exhaustion made the idea of standing feel impossible. For a moment, my eyelids drooped and I startled myself awake with a sudden jerk. I leaned back and let out a shaky exhale, trying to stay present. The park was quiet except for the distant swoosh of a car on the road and the gentle lap of water against the rocky shoreline. Then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound on pavement. Not footsteps exactly, more like skin brushing against concrete. I straightened instinctively, my heart picking up. The sound grew closer, slow and uneven, as though whoever was approaching could barely lift their feet. I turned my head, expecting maybe a deer wandering too close to the path, or a jogger who had twisted an ankle. But what emerged from the shadowed walkway made me sit up straight. An elderly man, thin as a reed, shuffled toward me. His gray hair hung in tangled waves around his face, whipping in the wind. His jacket was little more than a threadbare layer that might have once been brown, but now looked washed out and torn. But what caught my attention, what made my breath hitch, were his bare feet. They were red and pale at the tips, almost bluish, and he stepped carefully, wincing with every touch of the cold pavement. He stopped a few feet from the bench, arms wrapped around himself, as if trying to hold in what little warmth he had left. When he lifted his face toward me, I saw how exhausted he looked. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes watery and tired, his lips trembling uncontrollably. He swallowed hard before speaking, his voice rough and thin. "Miss," he said, "I do not suppose you know if any shelters still have room tonight." I blinked. The question hit me harder than the wind. A man twice my age, barefoot in freezing weather, asking me if I knew where he could go. All I had wanted all night was warmth and safety, and yet here stood someone who had even less than I did. I forced myself to meet his eyes and shook my head slowly. "I am sorry," I said quietly. "I do not have anywhere either." The shame of that sentence settled over me like another layer of cold. The man studied me for a long moment, as though he could see straight through the facade of calm I was trying to maintain. His eyes softened with a hint of understanding. Then he lowered himself onto the bench, leaving a respectful space between us, and released a long breath that trembled in the air. For a while, we sat in silence, listening to the distant hum of cars on the highway and the wind rushing through bare branches. I stole a glance at his feet again. They looked worse now that he was still, the purplish color creeping toward a frightening white. I had read enough about frostbite to know what that meant. Something inside me cracked open. I thought of my father slamming the door, my mother turning away, Blake laughing as if my pain were entertainment. I thought of all the times I had tried to earn affection, approval, some sign that I mattered. And then I looked at the man beside me, someone who had no one watching, no one caring, not even shoes to protect him from the cold. Without thinking, I stood and shrugged off the only warm thing I had left. A thin coat, old but decent, barely enough for this weather. He looked up sharply. "Miss, you should not." I placed the coat around his shoulders before he could finish. The fabric swallowed his thin frame, and he pulled it close instinctively, as though afraid it would vanish. Warmth hit him immediately. I saw it in the way his eyelids fluttered, the way his body relaxed just a fraction. He looked up at me, truly looked with a depth that made my throat tighten. His hands, trembling and thin, reached out and took mine gently. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The park felt strangely quiet, as if the world paused long enough for the moment to matter. Finally, he whispered, "You gave away warmth when you had none." The words sank deep, deeper than any insult from my family ever had. Before I could respond, the man released my hands and slowly rose to his feet. He nodded once with a tired smile, then shuffled away into the dark path leading toward the lake. His steps were slow, unsteady, but somehow purposeful. I watched until his figure disappeared behind a cluster of pine trees, leaving me alone again on the bench with the cold biting harder than before, but with something warm flickering quietly in my chest. The moment the elderly man disappeared into the shadows of the park, the cold seemed to crash into me all at once, sharper and more punishing than before. Giving him my coat had felt instinctive, almost like a reflex, but as soon as he was gone, the reality hit me. I had nothing left between my skin and the freezing Oregon night but a cardigan so thin it might as well have been made of paper. The wind swept through the open space facing the lake and slammed into my body so hard I gasped. My arms wrapped around myself on instinct, but the shivering came almost immediately violent and uncontrollable. My fingertips burned first with a prickling ache that pulsed under the skin, then slowly dulled into a frightening numbness. I flexed them, trying to keep the blood moving, but they responded sluggishly, as if each finger belonged to someone else. I sat there for a while longer, too stunned to move, listening to the branches rattle in the wind and the distant buzz of cars crossing the bridge. Every breath came out shallow and shaky. My thoughts drifted in and out, unfocused, as if someone were slowly turning the dimmer switch on my awareness. My legs began to tremble so hard the bench vibrated beneath me. I knew these signs. I had volunteered at shelters before. I recognized the slow crawl of hypothermia beginning its path. I needed to move. I needed to get somewhere with walls and heat before my body stopped cooperating. Forcing myself upright felt like wading through heavy sand. My muscles resisted every command. When I finally stood, my knees buckled and I caught myself on the armrest of the bench. I inhaled sharply and told myself out loud to move. Just walk, one step at a time. My suitcase felt twice as heavy as it had earlier. The metal handle burned my palm with cold and slipped immediately as if my grip were no longer strong enough to close around it. I tried a second time and managed to hold it, but the numbness crawling up my fingers made it difficult to tell if I was grasping it tightly or barely holding on. The path leading out of the park felt longer this time. My body swayed with each step, and the shadows between the streetlights seemed darker than they should have been. I focused on the ground in front of me, counting each footstep as if the numbers themselves could push me forward. 5 steps. 10. 15. My breathing sounded louder now, a strained sound catching in my throat. When I reached the edge of the park, my vision wavered for a moment, blurred by another wave of cold. I blinked hard, trying to clear it. Lights from the houses beyond the trees swam slightly in my vision before sharpening again. I needed help. I hated the thought of asking for it. After everything that happened tonight, the last thing I wanted was to rely on anyone. But pride was useless in weather like this. A sudden flash of headlights caught the corner of my eye. A patrol car rolled slowly toward the intersection, its tires crunching softly over the icy road. Relief washed over me so strong my knees almost gave out again. If I could just ask for directions or a ride to a warmer spot or anything. I lifted a shaky hand, not quite waving, but enough to catch attention. The cruiser slowed. The passenger side window lowered, releasing a warm burst of air that drifted toward me like a small miracle. Inside sat a middle-aged officer with tired but kind eyes. "Ma'am," he called out, "are you all right out here?" I opened my mouth, but the words tangled in my throat. The cold made my jaw stiff. I forced a nod, accompanied by a whisper, "I am fine." The officer frowned slightly. "It is freezing out. You do not have a coat. Where are you headed?" His concern made my eyes burn again with emotion I refused to let fall. I swallowed hard and pointed vaguely down the road. "Just trying to get to a place to stay." The officer studied me, clearly unconvinced. "You should not be walking in this weather. The nearest motel is 3 blocks that way," he said, pointing down Maple Street. "I cannot give you a ride due to policy, but if you head straight, you will see it on the right." That was all I needed. I nodded quickly. "Thank you. Please be careful," he added. "It is getting colder by the hour." With that, he rolled the window back up and drove slowly forward, glancing at me once in the rearview mirror. The warmth that had briefly escaped from the car vanished the moment the glass closed, leaving me shivering harder than before. But the information was enough. 3 blocks. I could do 3 blocks. Or at least I had to try. The walk felt endless. My legs moved stiffly, each step a battle against the numbness spreading up from my feet. The sidewalks were slick with thin film of ice forming as temperatures dropped further. My shoes had no insulation, and each step felt like I was grinding my skin against frozen stone. Twice I had to stop to breathe through a wave of dizziness. Each time I leaned heavily on my suitcase to stay upright. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping over me, but no one slowed. People rarely stop on freezing holidays. At long last, the neon sign of the Silver Pine Motel flickered into view, its buzzing letters half burned out, casting an eerie blue glow across the parking lot. Relief hit me so hard my eyes blurred. I reached the front office, pushed open the door, and let the warm, stale air wash over me. The lobby smelled like cleaning spray, mixed with old carpet, but it felt heavenly compared to the cold outside. The night clerk barely looked up from his phone as he slid a form across the counter. "Cash only," he mumbled. I handed over the last bills I had, knowing it meant I would have nothing left tomorrow. He gave me a room key and pointed toward a dim hallway. "Room 14, end of the hall." I dragged myself to the door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The room was small and worn, the wallpaper peeling in places, the heater rattling weakly as it struggled to warm the space. But it was shelter. I sat on the edge of the bed, my body shaking uncontrollably as the feeling slowly began to return to my hands and feet, painful and sharp at first, then duller. I wrapped the thin motel blanket around myself and finally allowed my eyes to close. For the first time since being thrown out, I felt a fragile sense of safety settling over me. It was not much, but it was enough to keep me alive through the night. I woke to a rattling sound that did not belong to the flimsy wall heater sputtering in the corner. For a moment, I lay still on the hard motel mattress, disoriented, my mind foggy from the cold and exhaustion of the night before. Then came another sound, sharper this time, like multiple car doors shutting in quick succession. I blinked and pushed myself upright, the thin motel blanket slipping from my shoulders. Weak sunlight filtered through the blinds in pale strips across the stained carpet. The clock on the bedside table blinked 8:42, too early for cleaning staff and too purposeful to be random guests coming and going. I rubbed my eyes and listened again. The muffled hum of engines rumbled outside, not one engine, but several, low and steady like a small convoy. Curiosity pulled me toward the window, though a flicker of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I moved slowly, still sore from the cold, and lifted one of the blinds with 2 fingers. The sight on the other side made my breath catch. Parked across the entire front row of the motel lot were 4 black vehicles. 3 large Cadillac Escalade SUVs, identical in color and shine, and between them a long black Cadillac sedan polished enough to catch the morning light like a mirror. I had seen cars like these only in political documentaries or corporate news segments, never at a rundown motel with flickering neon signage and cracked asphalt. For a few seconds I wondered if someone important had been arrested or if a politician had stopped here by accident, but then the rear door of the sedan opened smoothly, almost ceremoniously. A man stepped out and the confusion in my mind tightened into disbelief. It was the elderly man from the park, but he did not look anything like the freezing, trembling figure I had wrapped my coat around the night before. His hair, still silver, was neatly combed back. His face, though lined with age, looked alert and rested. He wore a tailored camel coat that fell perfectly across his shoulders, with polished brown leather shoes that seemed impossibly clean for a motel parking lot. Even from behind the blinds, I could see the subtle sheen of the fabric, the kind only expensive designers used. 2 men in discreet dark suits stepped out of the SUV behind him, their posture upright and scanning the surroundings with the practiced movements of professional security. The kind who never needed to announce who they were. My stomach dropped. I stepped back from the window quickly, heart pounding hard enough that I felt it in my throat. What was he doing here? Had he followed me? Was he angry I gave him the coat? I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was still half asleep and imagining the whole thing. But then there was a firm knock at the door. Not loud or aggressive, but confident. A sound made by someone who expected the door to open. I froze, staring at the door handle as if it might turn on its own. The knock came again, followed by a calm voice. "Miss Hayes." My pulse spiked. He knew my name. Slowly, with my hand trembling despite the warmth of the room, I approached the door. I hesitated a long moment before cracking it open just an inch. The man stood there, the same face I had seen shivering in the park less than 12 hours earlier, but now composed and dignified. Behind him, one of the security men stood with his hands clasped in front of him, watching the walkway with detached focus. The elderly man offered a small smile, gentle but deliberate. "May I come in for a moment?" I opened the door a little wider but still blocked the doorway with my body. "How did you know my name?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He inclined his head slightly. "My name is Jonathan Thorne. Last night, after you left the park, my security team came to pick me up. They had been waiting nearby as they always do." My confusion must have shown because he continued without pause. "It is not safe for me to be out alone at night, even when I insist on doing it anyway." His tone was calm-spoken, like a man who was used to people questioning his choices, but not contradicting them. Jonathan looked at me, then really looked with a gaze that held recognition instead of the vacant tiredness I had seen the night before. "When my team saw what you did," he continued, "I asked them to keep an eye on you until morning, just to be certain you made it somewhere warm." He paused, and his voice softened. "You saved my life last night." The statement knocked the breath out of me. I stared at him, unsure how to respond. Images of his bare feet, the blue tinge in his skin, the trembling in his hands replayed in my mind. I had known he was in danger, but not how severe it was. Before I could speak, he gestured toward the parking lot. "I would like you to come with me for a moment. There is something I want to discuss." I blinked. Go with him, into one of those cars. My heart hammered harder. Why? I asked. My voice came out more fragile than I intended, because he replied, You gave away the last warmth you had to a stranger with nothing to offer in return. People do not do that anymore. I want to talk to you about it. He turned slightly so I could see the open door of the sedan waiting behind him. The interior was warm and glowing softly in the sunlight. The security guard stepped back as if giving me space to decide. I swallowed hard, glancing down at my thin cardigan, remembering the cold still lingering in my bones. You are safe, he said, reading the uncertainty on my face, if you choose to come. If not, his voice deepened slightly. I will leave you be. The choice is yours. Something about the way he said it settled over me like a weighted blanket, a calm certainty, a reassurance without pressure. I hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. Let me get my things. His smile widened just a fraction. Take your time, Miss Hayes. I will be right here. As I closed the door to grab my suitcase, my pulse raced with a new kind of energy. Fear, yes, but also something else, something I had not felt in years. Possibility. By the time I stepped back outside the motel room with my small suitcase in hand, the morning light had stretched across the parking lot, reflecting off the glossy black cars waiting like silent sentinels. The cold air nipped at my skin, but it no longer carried the bite of last night's wind. Maybe it was the sunlight. Maybe it was the strange sense of protection radiating from the men standing beside the vehicles. Jonathan waited near the open door of the Cadillac sedan, one hand lightly resting on the frame as if he were holding it for an old friend. He did not rush me. He simply nodded when I approached, studying me with a gentleness that made my chest tighten. When I reached him, he stepped aside and motioned subtly toward the interior. I hesitated only a heartbeat before sliding into the back seat. The warmth enveloped me instantly, thick and comforting. Soft leather cushioned my legs, and the faint scent of cedar and something clean, like bergamot, lingered in the air. Jonathan eased in beside me, and the door closed automatically, sealing out the cold. The partition between the driver and the back seat was lowered, allowing a clear view of the driver in a black suit, who met Jonathan's eyes through the mirror and gave a tiny nod before pulling smoothly out of the parking lot. As the motel receded into the distance, I clasped my hands together on my lap, trying to hide how much they were still trembling. Jonathan watched me for a moment before speaking. You are warmer now, I hope. I nodded. Yes. Thank you. His eyes softened. You are welcome. My security team said you nearly collapsed last night. You should not have been out there alone. A familiar ache crawled up my throat at his words. I did not want to cry in front of him, so I stared at my suitcase instead and forced my voice to remain steady. I did not have anywhere else to go. He hummed thoughtfully, a sound that was neither pity nor judgment, only understanding. The city passed by outside the windows. Frost still clung to the edges of rooftops and lawns. Early morning joggers in down jackets bounced along sidewalks, and a few bundled families carried leftover pies and foil-covered dishes to cars continuing the holiday gatherings I had never had. Jonathan folded his hands neatly in his lap and looked at me with a seriousness that made me straighten instinctively. Miss Hayes, he began, I have a tradition I follow every Thanksgiving Eve, something I have done for almost 2 decades now. I waited unsure whether he expected a response. He continued anyway. Every year I leave my home without a phone or wallet. I take on the appearance of someone who has nothing. I walk through the city until I find out whether kindness still exists when no one thinks they are being watched. His words sank in, slowly settling like warm stones in the center of my chest. My mind struggled to connect the man in the park with the man sitting next to me. Last night he had looked frail, exhausted on the edge of collapse. Now he looked composed and commanding, someone whose presence filled the car effortlessly. I could not help but ask quietly, Why do you do that? His gaze shifted toward the window for a moment, as though watching a memory replay itself across the passing landscape. When I was young, I had nothing, he said softly, nothing but the clothes on my back. Most nights I slept under bridges or in abandoned buildings. No one noticed, no one cared, until someone did. His voice thickened slightly. A man offered me a place to stay for a week. a warm bed, a chance. It changed everything. He paused, letting the weight of the story settle before turning back to me. I made a promise then. If I ever had enough, I would walk the city every year and try to return that same kindness to someone who needed it. I stared at him, surprised by how carefully the pieces of his life fit together. His clothes, his security team, the fleet of cars, all of it made sense now. "You did not have anything on you last night," I said, "not even shoes." He nodded. "Sometimes it is necessary to go to the extreme to understand what desperation feels like, and to see how people respond to it." My breath caught again. He held my gaze with an intensity that made my heart stumble. "And you gave away the only coat you had left, to someone who looked like he had nothing to offer." He leaned back slightly in the seat. "That is not something I witness often. Not anymore." I swallowed hard. I did not do it for a reason. I just could not watch him freeze. His expression warmed into something like quiet pride. "That is exactly why I am here." The sedan curved onto a quieter road, lined with fir trees and expensive homes spaced far apart. A lake glimmered behind the pines, the surface still in silver in the morning light. The car slowed and turned through an open wrought iron gate. We drove along a winding driveway bordered by winter bare rose bushes and tall stone lanterns. At the end of the drive, a sprawling home came into view. It was not ostentatious like the houses in my old neighborhood. This one was timeless, a craftsman estate built of dark wood and stone with wide porches and windows that gleamed in the sun. It sat close to the lake, almost blending into the landscape as though it had grown there naturally. When the car rolled to a gentle stop in front of the entrance, I stared out the window in stunned silence. Jonathan waited until the driver stepped out to open the door. Then he turned to me. "I would like to offer you something, Miss Hayes. A chance, a place to stay. A way to rebuild your life." His voice was steady but kind. "If you choose it." I looked at him, breath-catching. He continued, "I want you to stay here, in my home, for a few months. Rest, recover, learn. I can teach you everything someone once taught me." The words felt unreal. A part of me wondered if I was dreaming or hallucinating from the cold. "Why me?" I whispered. "After everything that happened." Because he said with quiet conviction, "You chose compassion when the world gave you every reason to choose bitterness instead." He gestured toward the house bathed in morning light. "So what do you say, Miss Hayes? Are you ready to come inside?" The first morning I woke up inside Jonathan's lakeside estate felt almost unreal, as if I had stepped into someone else's life without permission. My room overlooked the water, and pale winter light spilled across the quilted blankets, warming the edge of the bed. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the faint crackle of a fireplace somewhere down the hall and the distant hum of a heating system that worked far better than anything I had ever lived with. But the comfort lasted only seconds before a sinking heaviness settled into my stomach. I was safe, warm and fed, yet somehow more anxious than I had been in years. This place was too nice, too generous, too undeserved. I half expected someone to burst into the room and tell me a mistake had been made. At 7 exactly, there was a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, one of the security staff, a man named Reed, handed me a schedule printed neatly on thick paper. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," he said. "Mr. Thorne asked me to give you this." Then he nodded and walked away down the hallway without explanation. I closed the door and unfolded the schedule. My eyes widened as I read, 6:30 to 7:15 morning run around the lake, 7:30 breakfast with Mr. Thorne, 8 to noon financial literacy and nonprofit operations study, noon to 1 lunch, 1 to 4 observational training at the foundation office, 4 to 6 reflection writing and personal development, 6:30 dinner. I stared at the paper, half laughing, half panicking. I had not run since college. I had not eaten a structured breakfast in years. I had not studied anything more complicated than library catalog software since my early 20s. What was he expecting me to become? I forced myself to dress quickly, pulling on athletic clothes from a drawer stocked with neatly folded items I did not recognize. Someone had prepared the room before I arrived with the kind of thoughtful detail that made my chest tighten. When I stepped outside, the cold air slapped my face, waking me fully. Reed stood by the path with another man I had not met yet. Both wore lightweight running jackets despite the chill. The second man introduced himself as Harris, the estate trainer who once worked with Navy operations. My legs felt weak at the word trainer. "Let us start slow," he said, as if sensing the dread growing inside me. "We will take the full loop today. Pace does not matter." But it did matter. Within the first 5 minutes, my lungs burned. My legs cramped. Frosty air cut into my throat like glass shards. Harris kept a steady pace beside me while Reed jogged a little ahead, checking the icy patches. I hated how quickly I fell behind. I hated how weak I felt. And most of all, I hated how familiar the shame was, as if I had been dropped right back into childhood, where every failure was spotlighted and every success ignored. By the time we finished the loop, my hands were shaking and I bent forward, gripping my knees, breath coming in ragged gasps. Harris simply nodded. "You showed up. That is enough for the first day." I followed him back to the house, face numb from cold and embarrassment. I barely had time to splash water on my face before heading to breakfast. Jonathan waited in the dining room beside a window that overlooked the lake. He was already dressed in a dark sweater and reading through several papers spread across the table. When he looked up, he smiled warmly. "Good morning, Miss Hayes. How was the run?" "Humiliating," I admitted before I could stop myself. He chuckled softly. "Progress rarely feels graceful at the beginning. Sit, eat. You will need your strength." The food was simple but delicious: scrambled eggs, toast fruit hot tea. I realized halfway through the meal that it had been months since I had eaten breakfast at a real table and years since anyone had eaten with me. After breakfast, he led me to a small study lined with bookshelves. Binders and folders crowded the long table, and each one was labeled meticulously with topics like grant allocation models, housing stability metrics, and fiscal oversight systems. My head spun. Jonathan handed me a binder. "Today, we start with the basics." Hours later, I sat hunched over the table, rubbing my temples as numbers and policies blurred together. My body still ached from the run, and now my mind felt equally worn. Jonathan corrected me gently when I misinterpreted a chart, then asked me to explain it again. Each mistake felt like a pinprick to my pride, but he never raised his voice, never sighed in disappointment, never compared me to anyone else. Somehow, that made it harder. I was not used to patience. I was used to being judged quickly and harshly. After lunch, we drove to his foundations office, a modest building near downtown. No marble floors or glass towers, just efficient hallways and warm lighting. Staff members greeted Jonathan with respect and curiosity when he introduced me. "This is Elena," he said kindly. "She will be observing our work for a while." I tried to smile, but my nerves tightened every muscle in my face. I followed him into meeting rooms where program managers discussed budgets and strategies and the impact of housing initiatives. Their conversations moved fast and used terminology I barely understood. I took notes until my hand cramped. By late afternoon, I could hardly think straight. When we returned to the estate, Jonathan handed me a notebook. "Spend some time writing. Not about data, about what you felt today. Growth requires awareness." I sat at the desk in my room, staring at the blank page for nearly 10 minutes. Eventually, the words began to spill out. Fear that I did not belong here. Shame that I could not keep up. Gratitude for being treated with respect. And beneath it all, a small, fierce determination I had not felt in years. Dinner was quiet. Jonathan asked nothing more of me that evening. Afterward, I went to my room and stood by the window, looking out at the lake glimmering under the faint moonlight. My legs ached. My head throbbed. My heart felt bruised from the unfamiliar weight of someone believing I could be more than what my family had convinced me I was. These were the hardest days I had lived in a long time, but somewhere inside me a spark flickered, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this pain meant I was finally moving forward instead of being pushed down. By the start of the third week, the rhythm of the estate had carved itself into my body, but my confidence had not caught up. I woke before dawn without needing Reed's gentle knock and laced up my running shoes, even though every muscle still protested the cold morning air. I sat through breakfast with Jonathan, trying to push myself to absorb the lessons he gave so easily. I spent hours at the long table in the study practicing calculations, learning frameworks, and reading case files until the words blurred together. I wanted to be good at this. I wanted to prove that what he saw in me was not a mistake. But wanting and succeeding are rarely the same thing. The day my first real failure came began like every other. The lake was still half frozen, the thin ice near the shore cracking softly as the sun rose. I ran the morning loop more smoothly than before, but still fell behind Reed and Harris by several yards. Breakfast passed with polite conversation. Jonathan reviewed the day's agenda, reminding me that the Foundation Board would expect a weekly summary of the department's activities. Today, he said the housing team is reviewing expansion proposals for next quarter. I want you to observe so you can learn how to identify weak points in a plan. I nodded, trying to ignore the tightening in my chest. Observation I could handle. Being seen was harder. When we arrived at the office, the hallway buzzed with activity. Staff members hurried between conference rooms carrying tablets and folders. Someone printed a stack of charts that smelled sharply of fresh toner. Inside the main conference room, several team leads sat around a long table preparing for a presentation. Jonathan joined them at the head of the table and gestured for me to take a seat along the side where interns usually sat. Even though I was only observing, every muscle in my body felt tense, like I was sitting under a spotlight instead of fluorescent ceiling lights. A woman named Dana led the meeting, flipping through slides and explaining budget projections with a confidence I envied. I took notes, obsessively trying to keep up with the numbers. 90-page proposals, staffing breakdowns, square footage estimates, zoning law summaries. It was more information than I had ever processed at one time. When the meeting ended, Jonathan placed a stack of papers in front of me. "These proposals need summary sheets," he said lightly. 1 page each, high-level points, major concerns. We will review them tonight. The stack was nearly 2 inches thick. I swallowed and nodded. Of course. The rest of the day blurred. I sat in a small corner of the office typing summaries as fast as I could, rereading each proposal and trying to condense complicated information into clear, short notes. Hours passed. I skipped lunch. My eyes felt dry. My mind raced, struggling to focus through the mounting fog of fatigue. By late afternoon, I had finished 14 summaries. I felt proud of that number until I lifted the stack of rejected outlines Jonathan placed beside me days earlier. 14 was not even half. When we returned to the estate, I forced myself to stay awake even though my head throbbed. I spread the summaries across the study table and waited for Jonathan to sit beside me. He skimmed the first page slowly, his face unreadable. I watched anxiously, barely breathing. After a moment, he set the page down. "Elena," he said gently, "walk me through how you approached this." The question made my stomach drop. I had hoped the work would speak for itself. I cleared my throat and tried to explain how I pulled information from the proposals and listed anything that seemed important. Jonathan listened patiently, nodding here and there. Then he tapped the top of the page. "This summary lists the cost estimates. But what about the risk factors?" I felt my face warm. "I thought I included them." "Look again," he said quietly. Not unkind, just firm. I took the paper back and read through it. My eyes stung as I realized he was right. I had written numbers but not implications. Data without analysis. Facts without judgment. My chest tightened painfully. "Let us look at the next one," he said. Each summary told the same story. Missing context. Missing evaluation. Missing fundamental elements. The more pages he turned, the smaller I felt. Halfway through, he paused and looked at me with concern, softening his features. "You have worked hard today," he said, "but this is not your best work." The words hit me with more force than if he had shouted. I stared at the carpet because looking at him felt impossible. I knew I had failed. I knew he had expected better. I wanted to apologize, but my throat closed up. Instead, I whispered, "I am sorry." Jonathan shook his head. "Do not apologize for trying, but do not pretend this is your limit." I sat very still, fighting the urge to cry. His voice softened even more. "What did today make you feel?" I swallowed thickly. Like, maybe my family was right. Maybe I am not cut out for anything more than I have been. The room went quiet. Jonathan leaned back and folded his hands. "Your family was wrong." He said the words without hesitation. "But you have to believe that more than I do." I blinked hard, willing the tears not to fall. He stood and gathered the papers into a neat pile. Rest. Tomorrow we start again. After he left, I sat in the study alone, staring at my own handwriting across dozens of pages that suddenly looked childish and inadequate. Shame curled around me like an old familiar ghost, whispering that I was not capable, not smart enough, not worthy. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened, trying to steady myself. I reminded myself that this was only the beginning, that growth was supposed to hurt. But part of me wished desperately that I could skip ahead to the version of myself who already knew what she was doing. Instead, I gathered the papers and carried them back to my room. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, the lamp casting a warm circle of light around me. For the first time since arriving, I let the tears fall freely, silent but overwhelming. Failing in front of Jonathan felt worse than being shoved by Blake or dismissed by my mother. Because for once, I had wanted to succeed. For once, someone believed I could, and I was terrified of proving him wrong. When the tears finally slowed, I wiped my face and picked up the first summary again. This time, I read it not with shame, but with determination. I would learn. I would improve. And I would not let this failure define me. The morning after my failure felt heavier than any of the cold dawns before it, as if the embarrassment from the night prior had settled into my bones alongside the winter chill. I woke with a tightness in my chest that made it difficult to sit up, but I forced myself to swing my legs over the edge of the bed and plant my feet firmly on the warm wooden floor. The embarrassment had not faded overnight. It clung to me like frost. I laced my shoes with stiff fingers and stepped outside for the morning run. Reed and Harris greeted me with their usual professionalism, offering no hint that they knew anything about what happened. Still, my feet felt sluggish and my lungs tight as we began the familiar loop around the lake. The sky glowed with a faint lavender tint and thin sheets of ice glimmered across the water. My breaths puffed into the air in small clouds. Every step felt heavier than the last, but something inside me pushed more fiercely than before. Halfway through the loop, I stumbled on a patch of uneven dirt and caught myself just before hitting the ground. Harris slowed. "You all right?" "Yes." "Keep going." The words came out harsher than intended, driven by determination more than irritation. By the time we finished the run, my legs shook, but the tightness in my chest had loosened just enough to breathe normally again. Breakfast with Jonathan was quiet. He offered no reminder of the previous night, no lecture, no probing questions. His calmness unsettled me more than anger would have. I wanted him to say something. Instead, he simply passed me the honey for my tea and asked whether I slept well. I lied and said yes. After breakfast, he led me into the study. The stack of summaries I had rewritten late into the night sat neatly arranged in the center of the table. I stopped when I saw them, feeling a jolt in my stomach. He looked at me expectantly. "Ready to start again?" I nodded. My voice barely made it past my throat. "I think so." He sat and opened the first page. I stood opposite him, unable to sit too nervous to be still. He read silently for a long moment, eyes scanning each line with practiced precision. I waited, feeling the familiar drop in my stomach, anticipating another mistake. But then he lifted his gaze and something in his expression shifted. "Better," he said simply. I exhaled sharply, a breath I had been holding without realizing. He tapped the margin with his finger. "You identified the zoning conflict here. This was the biggest flaw in the proposal." "Good." A warmth spread through my chest so quickly it startled me. I leaned forward slightly. "Really?" He nodded. "And your analysis of the cost projections is clearer. You caught an inflation error in the vendor estimate." I blinked in surprise. I had caught it near midnight while rereading the documents, feeling half delirious and almost deleting it because I thought I was misreading. He read through several more pages, nodding thoughtfully. "The mistakes that remain are easy to fix. You are learning faster than you think." The praise, though measured, felt like a balm. My throat tightened again, but not from shame. I finally sat down, knees feeling weak for a different reason. "So I am not a hopeless case?" Jonathan's eyes softened with a rare spark of humor. If you were hopeless, I would not waste my breath. Relief pulsed through me like warmth after a long freeze. For the next hour, we revised the summaries together. He asked me questions, making me explain each conclusion, pushing me to think instead of memorize. It was frustrating at times, but each time I answered correctly, a small bloom of pride formed inside me. Afterward, he stood and gathered his papers. Today, he said we visit a site project in South Portland. I want you to observe how proposals translate into real structures. I nodded, feeling a cautious excitement rise inside me. The drive into the city felt different that day. The sky was brighter, the air crisper. For the first time, the roads did not look like endless stretches of obligation. They looked like possibility. The South Portland site was a partially renovated apartment complex that the foundation was converting into transitional housing. Construction workers moved in and out carrying equipment. Inside the building walls stood open, exposing wiring and beams. The smell of sawdust filled the air. A project manager named Luis greeted us warmly and led us through the structure, explaining the progress. Jonathan paused, often asking me what I noticed. Look at the spacing between these frames, he said quietly. Does the proposal reflect reality? I scanned the room slowly. No. The dimensions in the document showed wider spacing. And what does that mean? That the project will need additional reinforcement, more cost. He nodded. Exactly. My heart surged with a small burst of pride. As we continued, I found myself noticing small inconsistencies, small gaps between paper and reality. Luis explained the challenges, and occasionally I asked questions. At first, my voice trembled slightly, but as the conversation continued, I found my footing. By the end of the tour, something inside me felt different. I felt capable, not fully, not confidently, but capable. When we returned to the estate that evening, Jonathan paused at the front steps and turned to me. You saw things today you would not have noticed a week ago. That is what growth looks like. His words sank deep. Growth, not perfection, not comparison, not failure. Growth. After dinner, I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring out at the lake shimmering under the rising moon. I realized I had not thought of my family all day. Not once. Not their judgment. Not their cruelty. Not the empty space they left in me. For the first time in years, the silence in my mind felt peaceful instead of lonely. The next morning, I ran faster. Not by much, but enough that Reed glanced over with something like approval. My lungs burned again, but this time it felt like progress instead of punishment. When we finished the loop, I stood taller than the day before. Later in the study, Jonathan handed me a new stack of files. I did not panic this time. I opened the first one with steady hands. Somewhere during that week, my fear had begun turning into focus and my shame into determination. The pain of failing had not disappeared, but it had sharpened me instead of breaking me. I was coming back to myself. Not the version my family had taught me to be quiet and small, but the version I was beginning to build brick by brick. And for the first time, I believed that version might actually have a place in this world. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in early spring, one of those rare Oregon days when the clouds broke long enough for sunlight to sweep across the lake like a warm hand. I had just finished reviewing a set of quarterly projections for the housing team when my phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. I ignored it at first, assuming it was a telemarketer, but it buzzed again and again until the vibrations rattled against the wood. Something in my chest tightened. When I finally answered, a shaky voice rushed through the line before I could speak. Elena. It was my mother. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I had not heard her voice in months. Not since the night she stood behind Blake while he shoved me and laughed as Dad threw my suitcase onto the icy porch. Hearing her now felt like an old wound being pressed suddenly and painfully. She inhaled sharply as if bracing herself. I need to talk to you. Something has happened. I froze. A part of me expected anger accusation or guilt tactics, but the tone in her voice was different this time. Weak, frayed, on the verge of breaking. Mom! I began cautiously what is going on. Silence filled the line for several seconds before she spoke again. Your father. We lost the house. My pulse stuttered. Lost how? She exhaled shakily. Back taxes. Liens. The bank took it this morning. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my fingers ached. Their home, the place where I grew up, the one they threw me out of without hesitation, had been taken by the bank. Before I could process it, she continued. And there is more. Blake, he is in trouble. A sick feeling crept through my stomach. What kind of trouble? SEC investigation, she whispered, like saying the letters out loud could summon a curse. Fraud. Investor deception. His company is collapsing. They are saying he could face federal charges. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the window where sunlight glinted across the lake, as if unaware of the storm unraveling through the phone. For years, Blake had strutted around with the arrogant certainty of someone protected by family favoritism. He was the golden child, the successor, the promised heir to everything my parents valued. Now that glittering pedestal had cracked beneath him. My mother sniffled. We did not know who else to call. There was no softness in her tone, only desperation and expectation. Expectation that I would drop everything and rescue them. Expectation that I would feel obligated simply because we shared blood. I stayed silent for a long moment. I thought about the Thanksgiving night they shattered my last piece of dignity. My father's words echoed through my mind cold and sharp. You are a failure. Get out of this house. My mother gaslighting me while I stood bruised and humiliated under their porch light. My brother recording my misery to entertain his friends. I thought of the freezing walk through Lake Oswego's wealthy neighborhoods, every warm window reminding me of what I did not have. I thought of the park bench where I nearly collapsed from the cold, the trembling old man I had wrapped my coat around, the motel where I barely survived the night. And then I thought of the life I had been building with Jonathan's guidance, a life carved slowly through discipline and pain and growth, a life I had earned. My mother spoke again, her voice tightening with impatience. Elena, did you hear me? We need money. We need help. A bitter laugh almost slipped out, but I caught it. She did not ask how I was. She did not apologize. She went straight to need, straight to expectation, straight to me cleaning up the damage of the people who destroyed me. I cleared my throat, my voice steady. Mom, I cannot fix this for you. She inhaled sharply as if insulted. You are being selfish. You owe this family. That word, owe. It hit me like ice water. For years, they treated me as a burden, a failure and embarrassment. Now suddenly, I was useful because I had climbed out of the hole they pushed me into. My anger simmered not explosive, but steady and controlled, the kind that comes when you finally understand a truth you spent your whole life avoiding. I do not owe you anything, I said quietly. Not anymore. Before she could respond, I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the desk. My heart hammered inside my chest, but my hands did not shake. I stared at the surface of the lake where a breeze rippled the reflection of the sky. For the first time in years, I felt the weight shift. The power was no longer in their hands. That night during dinner, I remained unusually quiet. Jonathan noticed but did not pry. After the dishes were cleared, he stepped onto the back porch overlooking the water and gestured for me to join him. You seem heavy, he said gently. Something happened. I nodded and explained everything. The foreclosure, the investigation, the phone call asking for money. He listened without interruption, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the lake shimmering under the porch lights. When I finished, he remained silent for a moment as though choosing his next words carefully. You cannot control their fall, he said finally, but you can choose whether you let it pull you down with them. I swallowed hard. It feels wrong not to help. He turned to me, expression firm. Helping is not the same as sacrificing yourself to save people who would not do the same for you. He stepped closer. Compassion is powerful, Elena, but it must be directed with wisdom, not obligation. His words struck something deep. The guilt that had curled around my ribs loosened. In the quiet that followed, I realized something else. My family's collapse was never about me. It was the result of years of pride deception and cruelty. Their downfall was not my responsibility. Their rebuilding would not be my burden. I exhaled slowly, the cold air puffing into the darkness. Jonathan watched me with a look that felt almost fatherly in its steadiness. "You are not the girl they threw out anymore," he said softly. "Remember that." Later that night in my room, I lay beneath the warm blankets listening to the distant sound of waves lapping against the dock. For the first time, their chaos no longer felt like a gravitational pull dragging me back to the life I escaped. Instead, it felt like something breaking far away in another world, one I had finally stepped out of. A world I no longer belonged to. They showed up on a gray Monday morning that smelled like damp concrete and burnt espresso. The kind of morning when the office felt too quiet and the sky pressed low over downtown Portland as if waiting for bad news. I had just finished a Zoom briefing with the project architects when my intercom buzzed sharply. It was Maya, the front desk coordinator, her usually steady voice pitched higher than normal. "Elena, there are 3 people downstairs asking for you. They do not have an appointment and they are refusing to leave." My stomach tightened instinctively even before she said the next words. "They say they are your family." My pulse clattered in my ears. I stood slowly smoothing the fabric of my blazer as if that tiny gesture could prepare me for the collision waiting below. "Tell security to escort them to conference room B," I said. "I will be there in a minute." When I entered the hallway, Jonathan had already stepped out from his office, his brows raised. "Trouble?" he asked. I exhaled through my nose. "My family." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded once. "Do you want backup?" I shook my head. "If I am going to face them, I need to do it on my own." The walk to conference room B felt longer than it should have. My heels clicked across the polished floor, echoing through the hallway. Each step pulled a memory to the surface like old photographs sliding out of a forgotten drawer. My father's voice calling me a burden, my mother turning her face away while Blake shoved me into the dining table, their laughter when they locked the door behind me. I braced myself as I pushed open the glass door. They were all sitting on one side of the table as if they had rehearsed their formation. My mother was the first to look up. Her face was thinner than I remembered cheekbones, sharper eyes rimmed red. She wore a cheap wool coat that didn't quite fit her shoulders. My father sat beside her, not in the tailored suits he once favored, but in worn khakis and a faded jacket that looked a decade old. His posture was slumped in a way that felt unfamiliar, as though someone had removed the rigid spine he had always carried like armor. And Blake. My brother sat at the end of the table, arms crossed, jaw tight, wearing an expression that shifted between defiance and humiliation. He looked older somehow, the arrogance drained out of him, but leaving behind something sour and unstable. I sat down across from them, letting the silence stretch. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice cracking around the edges. "Elena, thank you for seeing us. We did not know where else to go." I folded my hands neatly in front of me. "What do you need?" My father cleared his throat, his voice low. "We are staying in a motel in Gresham. Our lease application for an apartment was denied. We have no savings. The cars were repossessed last month. The foreclosure wiped everything else." My mother's eyes flicked toward my face, searching for pity. I felt none. Blake leaned forward abruptly. "We need help. You have money now, you have connections. Just give us a loan, we will pay it back." His tone was sharp, too close to entitlement. "How much?" He hesitated. 300,000. My eyebrows lifted. He rushed to justify it. "We need to get back on our feet, a down payment on a rental property. A startup idea I am working on. And an attorney for the SEC situation." I stared at him carefully, expressionless. "You are asking me for $300,000. He shrugged as if the number meant nothing. "You owe us." I laughed once, soft and disbelieving. My father flinched slightly. My mother whispered, "Elena, please just listen. We know we have made mistakes." Blake shot her a glare. "Mistakes," she repeated as if correcting herself. "What happened on Thanksgiving was wrong. We were wrong, but we are still your family." That word, again, family. They wielded it like a leash, like something that obligated me to forget everything they did. I leaned back in my chair. "Here is what I can offer you. 3 sets of resources." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were cards and brochures neatly arranged. A bankruptcy attorney who specializes in financial recovery. a nonprofit program that provides mental health support for families in crisis, a transitional housing organization that could help them find temporary placement. My father stared at the folder as if it were something foreign. My mother's lip trembled. Blake snapped the folder shut and shoved it back toward me. That is it. After everything our family has done for you. My jaw tightened. What exactly have you done for me? He stood up abruptly, pacing as his anger rose. We raised you. We gave you a home. We paid for your clothes and food. You think you would be anywhere without us. My voice remained calm. You kicked me out into freezing weather without a coat. Blake's nostrils flared. You deserved it. You were a failure. You humiliated us. The words stung even now, but not with the same depth as before. They felt distant, like echoes from a world I no longer lived in. I stood slowly, matching his height. I do not owe you $300,000. I do not owe you a rescue plan. And I do not owe you entry into the life I built without you. My mother broke into tears, her words spilling out in a frantic whisper. Please, Elena, please, please, we cannot survive like this. Your father is sick with stress. Blake will lose everything. We have no one else. I softened only slightly, but did not bend. The resources are there. Take them. That is the help I can offer. My father's voice cracked as he spoke for the first time without anger. Elena. I am sorry. For the first time, his eyes were not cold, not judgmental, just tired, broken. But even then, sorry was not a key that unlocked the past. It was only acknowledgement, and too late to rewrite the damage. Blake slammed his palm on the table. You are heartless. You think you are better than us because some rich old man found you on the street. My expression did not change. Leave, I said quietly. Now. He froze, stunned by the firmness in my tone. Security appeared at the door, having been called preemptively by Maya. My mother stood wobbling slightly and took my father's arm. Blake lingered, eyes burning. Then he followed them out without looking back. When the door clicked shut behind them, I exhaled slowly, unclenching my hands one finger at a time. For a long moment, I simply stood there, absorbing the thudding quiet left in their wake. I was not shaking. I was not crying. I was steady. For the first time in my life, their presence did not control the temperature of my world. I turned toward the window where rain streaked down the glass in thin, wandering paths. I felt something loosen in my chest, something like relief, something like the slow uncoiling of chains. When the conference room finally emptied of their voices and the air settled into a heavy quiet, I remained standing at the far end of the table, palms pressed against the cool surface, as I tried to slow the thundering in my chest. Their words still echoed in my ears, each accusation and plea rattling around like loose metal. But beneath the noise, there was a solid core inside me, something that had not existed years ago. Strength, boundaries, self-respect. I turned off the lights in Conference Room B and walked back toward my office, each step measured, controlled, deliberate. Maya peeked up from her desk as I passed. You okay? She whispered. I nodded. Thank you for handling the front. She gave me a sympathetic look, but said nothing else. People in this building knew my story. Not the details, but the broad contours. They knew about Thanksgiving night. They knew about Jonathan finding me half frozen and giving me a path upward. They knew I built everything from a place of brokenness, and that made them protective in quiet ways. Inside my office, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a breath I had been holding for what felt like hours. The skyline spread out beyond my window, drenched in silver light from the overcast sky. Buildings rose in silent rows, indifferent and steady. I needed that steadiness. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Conference Room B, now. My throat tightened. Part of me wanted to avoid another conversation, but I trusted him too much to ignore it. When I entered the room, he was already there, standing near the window, with his hands clasped loosely in front of him. His posture was calm, but his eyes tracked me with that piercing mix of care and scrutiny he used whenever he suspected I was holding myself together by brute force. Close the door, he said quietly. I did. Sit. I did that too. He remained standing. Tell me everything. I retold the conversation exactly as it happened. Their request, their accusations, their desperation. The moment Blake slammed the table. The moment I told them no. When I finished, he nodded slowly as though he had been expecting every word. "And how do you feel?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. How did I feel? Relieved, guilty, angry, free, sad, strong, wounded. It was all tangled together in a knot so tight I could barely find the ends. "I do not know," I finally said. Jonathan took that answer without judgment. He walked around the table and sat across from me, folding his hands. "Elena, saying no to the people who raised you is not cruelty. It is self-protection." I stared at my hands in my lap. "I can help people," I whispered. "I do it every day." But I could not help them. Would not he, corrected gently. "There is a difference. You are not responsible for repairing damage you did not cause." My jaw tightened. "They think I am." He gave a tired sigh. "Most families like yours operate on a simple rule. Whoever they break is expected to fix everything. You did not play along. That is why they are angry." I closed my eyes. They looked so desperate. Desperation does not erase the past, nor does it create entitlement. He leaned forward. "And you did help. Those referrals are exactly what any nonprofit would offer someone in their position. Temporary housing, legal guidance, mental health support. It is more than they ever gave you." My throat thickened. "They wanted money," I murmured. "They wanted a shortcut. But shortcuts are what destroyed them." I nodded because deep down I knew he was right. Blake's arrogance, my father's financial risks, my mother's refusal to confront the truth, all of it had built the collapse that now swallowed them whole. I did not push them toward ruin. I simply refused to be the rope they climbed to escape it. Jonathan softened his tone. "The question now is whether you regret saying no." I thought about that. Really thought. And slowly the answer formed with an unexpected clarity. "No." He smiled faintly. "Good. Because this moment will define the next chapter of your life more than any project or promotion. This is the moment you choose the family you build, not the one that tried to break you." I wiped the corner of my eye with my thumb. "It is just hard." He nodded again. "Hard things shape the strongest leaders. You will be fine. They will either learn or they will not. Either way, their path is no longer yours." After he left, I stayed in the room for several minutes. I stared at the empty chairs where my family had sat earlier, the indentation on the cushion where my mother perched nervously, the spot on the table where Blake slammed his palm, the faint smudges on the glass door from their hurried exit. These remnants felt ghostly, like footprints dissolving in snow. They had come into this space believing they could step into my new life as easily as they stepped out of the old one. But I was not that scared daughter anymore. I had walked through fire and frost and loneliness to stand here. And I had built something real, something mine. That evening, as the office quieted and the sunset cast muted lavender light across the walls, I received 3 consecutive text messages. One from Blake. "You will regret this." One from my father. "I never thought you would turn your back on us." One from my mother. "Please reconsider." I deleted none of them. I simply set the phone face down and stood at the window, watching headlights weave through the city below like threads of restless light. I whispered to the glass as if it held answers. "I am not your lifeline. I am not your scapegoat. I am not your second chance." The reflections of the city lights shimmered faintly over my face. The truth was simple. I had said no. And I meant it. When I finally left the building for the night, drizzle misted the air. The city smelled like wet pavement and pine. I walked slowly toward the parking garage with my coat pulled tight around me, not to shield myself, but to feel anchored inside my own skin. For the first time, I was not walking away from something. I was walking toward something better, something earned, something free. The storm did not hit all at once. It started with a single notification, a small red dot blooming on my phone screen the next morning while I stood in line at the coffee shop downstairs. I glanced down, expecting an email or meeting reminder, but instead saw the name that made my stomach tighten. "Blake Ward has posted a new video. My fingers turned cold around the cup I was holding. I should have ignored it. I should have put the phone away. But trauma has a gravity of its own. It pulls you in even when you know better. I opened the video. Blake sat in the dim interior of what looked like a cheap motel room. Pale walls stained yellow, a wrinkled curtain slumped behind him. His hair was unwashed, his eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. He spoke into the camera with a tremor that was half fury, half performance. My sister abandoned us. Thanksgiving night, she left our family to fall apart. Now she is rich and she refuses to help her own blood. She thinks she is better than us. She will not give us a dime. She is letting us drown. My jaw locked as I kept watching. He continued spinning the story, painting himself as a victim of his cruel sister who had turned her back on the people who raised her. He strategically omitted the part where they threw me out into freezing temperatures while he laughed. He did not mention shoving me against the dining table. He did not mention recording me crying on the porch. Instead, he crafted a narrative that made him sympathetic and me a soulless success story who climbed out of the mud only to kick the ladder away. And people believed it. Within an hour, the video had 10,000 views. By the time I walked into the office, it had 100,000. Comments piled up like debris after a storm. Wow, your sister sounds heartless. Family is everything. She should be ashamed. Some people are selfish no matter how much you give them. I felt the familiar punch of guilt rising in my chest until the algorithm did what the internet always does when it smells blood. It began to dig. Deep. Someone in the comments asked a simple question. Why did she cut off her family? And with that, the tide turned. A former high school classmate of Blake's replied with a video of his own, a shaky recording taken years ago in a school hallway. Blake shoving a smaller kid into a locker. Blake laughing while another girl cried. Blake dumping a soda over someone's backpack. The caption read, "He has always been a bully." People started scrolling through his old tagged photos. Someone found clips from his fraternity years, videos of him hazing pledges, mocking people, bragging about cheating on his girlfriend. Then someone else found Blake's old Instagram account and dug up the live stream he forgot to delete. The one from Thanksgiving night. The one where he pointed the camera at me while I struggled to carry my suitcase down the steps. The one where he said, "Watch this." The one where he laughed as Dad shoved me outside and slammed the door. The internet exploded. Thousands of people reposted the clip in less than an hour. Then came the commentary videos. A woman with purple glasses and a huge online following stitched the live stream and said, "I do not know who Elena Ward is, but honey, if you see this, you owe these people nothing." Another user posted screenshots of Blake's SEC investigation and said, "This dude is out here committing fraud and blaming his sister." Classic. A former neighbor from Lake Oswego chimed in with a detailed account of hearing Blake scream at his parents during summer barbecues and watching him throw a lawn chair across the yard once. Then a nanny who used to work for my family added her voice. She wrote a long comment explaining how Blake used to lock me out of the house for fun, and my parents always sided with him. She ended her post with, "I hope Elena is somewhere safe and loved because she deserved better than all of them." The comment section turned into a roaring wildfire. Suddenly, the narrative flipped, and I was no longer the villain. I was the survivor. The daughter who endured years of emotional abuse and finally escaped. Blake's video was now buried under duet stitches, analysis breakdowns, and long threads detailing the toxic dynamics of my family. People with backgrounds in psychology began dissecting the body language of the Thanksgiving live stream. They pointed out how I flinched when my father raised his voice, how my mother avoided eye contact, how Blake's laughter showed a pattern of chronic dehumanization that often appears in golden child scapegoat family systems. Even major commentary channels picked it up. One headline read, "He thought he could expose his sister, but the internet exposed him instead." When I arrived at work, my inbox was full of links from colleagues. All of them came with the same message. "Are you okay?" I walked to my office feeling like the floor was shifting beneath me. I closed the door and lowered myself into my chair, staring at the wall as the online hurricane raged outside the building. Jonathan knocked once and stepped in without waiting for an answer. He had his phone in one hand open to a feed of endless posts. "So it has begun," he said. I nodded silently. He placed the phone face down on the table. Are you all right? I inhaled slowly. I did not expect this. He sat across from me. The internet has an appetite for villains, but it also has a soft spot for underdogs, and you are the underdog in this story. I shrugged helplessly. I did not want a public war. He smiled slightly. You did not start one. Blake did, and now the truth is correcting the record. I stared out the window at the river glinting dully beneath the morning haze. It felt surreal. For years, I carried the shame of their cruelty like a heavy stone chained to my ribs. Now that weight was being lifted not by me, but by strangers who saw the truth with clearer eyes than I ever had. It felt liberating, terrifying, exposed, and healing all at once. Hours later, Blake posted another video attempting to defend himself, but the damage was already done. People stitched it with eye rolls. Others exposed more of his past behavior. Screenshots of his crypto losses. Business filings showing his company had been hemorrhaging money long before he blamed me. A thread went viral breaking down how his actions mirrored classic financial abuser tendencies. My parents were dragged into the spotlight too. People condemned their decision to throw me out on a holiday night. Someone wrote, "Any parent who kicks out their child in freezing weather loses the right to ask for anything later." I did not comment on anything. I did not respond. I simply watched quietly as the world pieced together the truth I had lived for decades. That evening, when I left the office, the sky was streaked with orange and pink. I felt lighter than I expected. As I walked to my car, a notification buzzed on my phone. This one was different. It was a message from someone I did not know. "I just want you to know you are not disposable. Thank you for standing up for yourself." I pressed the phone to my chest for a moment. The wind was cold, but it no longer felt like the night I had been thrown out. It felt like the beginning of a new one. 3.5 years passed in a way that felt both impossibly slow and breathtakingly fast, like watching a tree grow while living inside a storm. Seasons folded into one another, countless meetings filled my calendar, and project after project took shape under my hands. Yet when I looked back, the version of myself who once sat shivering on a park bench felt like someone from another lifetime. By then, I had become a quiet constant inside the foundation. People came to me for guidance on housing reports, impact audits, budget breakdowns, and site assessments. My team expanded from 2 assistants to a 15-person staff who trusted me, respected me, and occasionally teased me about drinking more coffee than water. I learned how to negotiate city contracts without being intimidated. I learned how to say no without apologizing. I learned how to present multi-million-dollar proposals to people who wore suits worth more than my first apartment. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I grew into someone who belonged in rooms that once terrified me. It happened on a Thursday morning, soaked in soft rain, the kind that painted the windows with silver streaks and muffled the city beneath a hush. I arrived early, as I always did, and found a yellow sticky note on my office door with Jonathan's handwriting. "Library, 8 o'clock. Bring your binder." My stomach fluttered. Jonathan only made rare early morning requests, and never with that tone. The last time he summoned me like this, he had introduced me to the board. I straightened my blazer, smoothed my hair, and headed toward the library. A grand room lined with cedar shelves that reached the ceiling and a long table at the center where major decisions were often made. He stood at the far end, pacing slowly in front of the stained glass window overlooking the lake. The room smelled like old books and rain and something that felt like anticipation. When he turned, he gave me a small smile that did not quite hide his tension. "Close the door, Elena." I did. Then I approached the table and saw a folder lying in the center, thick, heavy bound with a black ribbon. My heartbeat quickened. Jonathan rested his hands on the back of a chair. "Sit." I lowered myself slowly into the seat, palms sweating slightly against the polished wood. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he exhaled as if releasing something he had carried for decades. "You have grown more than I could have asked for. More than I expected." He paused, searching my face. "More than you give yourself credit for." My throat tightened. Jonathan was not a man who offered praise lightly. When he sat across from me, his expression softened into something almost paternal. "Do you remember the night I found you? The motel? The cold? The bus station? The way you apologized for existing." I nodded slowly. He continued, "And now here you sit, building programs that change lives, leading teams, standing firmly on your own feet. You are no longer that woman." I swallowed. "Thank you." He shook his head. "No, do not thank me yet." Then he slid the heavy folder across the table. "This is why I called you in." My pulse stumbled as I loosened the ribbon and opened the cover. The words on the first page pulled the breath from my lungs. Director of Housing Programs. My name was printed below in bold. I looked up at him stunned. Jonathan leaned back, watching my reaction with a warmth I rarely saw. The board approved it unanimously. Effective immediately. You will oversee the Foundation's entire housing division. That includes policy, budget, strategy, field operations, and partnerships with local government. My mind raced. I knew what that role meant. Responsibility, authority, trust. It was the highest position beneath Jonathan himself. I could barely speak. Jonathan continued before I could find my voice. "This is not a promotion for appearances. You earned this. Your project assessments have been precise. Your team respects you. Your proposals consistently outperform expectations. And more importantly, you lead with integrity. You see people, you understand them. That is what the Foundation needs. Not someone who crunches numbers, but someone who understands why the numbers matter." A warmth spread slowly through my chest. For years, I had feared that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how many degrees or certificates I earned, I would always feel like the girl who was shoved out the door on Thanksgiving night. But now, Jonathan was looking at me not with pity or protection, but with recognition. Recognition of capability, of purpose, of strength. I felt the shift like a sunbeam breaking through fog. I whispered, "I do not know what to say." He smiled gently. "Say you are ready. Are you?" I closed the folder and rested my hands on it. Yes. Yes, I am ready. Good. Because the first major assignment begins next week. A $250 million project. Mixed-use housing. Permanent supportive units. Integrated case management. State funding plus 2 philanthropic partners. It will be the biggest project we have ever attempted. My breath caught. That kind of project would take years. It would change the lives of thousands. It would influence statewide housing policy, and they wanted me to lead it. Jonathan tilted his head. "Do you know why I fought for you to be the one?" I shook my head. "Because you know what it means to build a home after having none. Because you understand that housing is not about structures. It is about dignity. You cannot teach that in school. You only learn it by surviving." Tears stung the corners of my eyes. He reached across the table and set his hand over mine in a rare gesture of gentle reassurance. "I believed in you the moment you handed your coat to a stranger on a freezing night. Everything since then has only proved I was right." We sat in quiet for a long moment, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the tall windows. At last, Jonathan stood. "We will make the announcement at the staff meeting this afternoon. Prepare a few words if you want to speak. If not, I will speak on your behalf." I exhaled slowly, overwhelmed but steady. "I think I should speak." He nodded approvingly. "Good. Then go take a walk around the lake. Clear your head. When you come back, you begin your next chapter." I rose from my seat, the folder clutched to my chest. As I stepped into the hallway, the enormity of it all washed over me. Not fear, not doubt. Something else. Belonging, purpose, becoming. The title on the folder felt like the final stitch in a wound that had taken years to close. And for the first time in my life, I felt not like someone who escaped the cold, but someone who created warmth for others. The dedication ceremony unfolded on a crisp autumn morning that smelled like pine trees, fresh paint, and the faint sweetness of roasted coffee drifting from the food trucks lined along the sidewalk. The sky was a clear Oregon blue, the kind that made every color appear sharper and every sound seem to travel farther. It felt unreal to stand at the threshold of a place that had once been nothing more than sketches on my laptop screen, a cluster of ideas scribbled during late nights when I doubted myself more than I believed in anything. Now the complex rose around me like a promise-fulfilled 4 buildings of glass timber and tasteful steel rising from newly planted gardens. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest tighten. Not because it was impressive, but because it was meaningful. Children's laughter echoed from the courtyard where volunteers handed out balloons. Reporters were already gathering near the podium, microphones angled like eager faces waiting for the first words. The governor's security detail scanned the area while city council members admired the vertical herb garden installed along the southern wall. My staff hurried back and forth, adjusting signage, arranging visitor passes, triple-checking sound equipment. Every inch of the project felt pulsing with life and possibility. I walked slowly through the plaza, letting my fingertips brush along the railings and the cool edges of the new benches. Months of decisions lived inside those details. The wood grain I agonized over. The height of the railings, the slope of the ramps, the placement of emergency exits, the width of hallways to accommodate wheelchairs, the play area surface chosen so children would not get scraped knees. This was more than a development. It was safety. It was dignity. It was exactly what I had once needed but never received. When I reached the center of the courtyard, Jonathan was already there, dressed in a dark suit with a silver tie that reflected the morning light. He looked both proud and contemplative, like a man witnessing something he had dreamed of but never expected to see, realized this perfectly. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he spotted me. "Big day," he said softly. I exhaled. That is one way to describe it. He smiled. Nervous. I nodded, terrified. Good. It means you understand the weight of what you have built. Behind us, the $250 million complex stretched like a living testimony to every hard decision, every night spent revising plans, every tough conversation with city officials. Permanent supportive housing units with trauma-informed design, on-site medical clinics staffed with full-time professionals, daycare center offering free early childhood programs, job training classrooms, community gardens, rooftop greenhouse, solar arrays capable of powering the entire complex, all designed to welcome people who had been turned away everywhere else. Jonathan stepped beside me, his voice low. "You know I have built dozens of projects, but this one feels different because it carries your signature." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I did not build it alone. No, but you built the reason for it. The ceremony began with the mayor stepping up to the podium, his voice booming through the speakers about innovation partnership and statewide progress. The governor followed, building momentum around the legacy this project would create. I barely heard any of it. My heart was pounding too hard in my ears. My palms were damp, my throat felt thick. Then Jonathan leaned toward me. "Your turn." My breath caught. I climbed the steps to the podium and adjusted the microphone. The crowd stretched out before me, cameras waiting, residents waiting, staff waiting, families waiting, all expecting something worthy of this moment. For a second, my vision blurred, not from fear, but from the magnitude of it all. Then I inhaled deeply and began. 3.5 years ago, I started with nothing but determination and the willingness to learn. And today, we open the doors to something far greater than a building. We open a place where families can rest without fear, where children can sleep safely, where people who have lost everything can start again. I paused, scanning the crowd. I thought about the night I had been thrown out, the freezing air, the loneliness, the feeling of being disposable. That is exactly what this place is built to erase. No one who walks through these doors will ever feel disposable again. The crowd quieted, absorbing every word. Home is not 4 walls. Home is the moment someone believes in you before you believe in yourself. And today we are creating homes. Real homes. Homes with dignity, resources, opportunity, and hope. I felt Jonathan's gaze on me from the front row, steady and proud. This project honors the truth that saved my life. Kindness can change everything. Kindness can rebuild what cruelty destroys. And kindness can turn a cold night into a new beginning. When I finished, the applause rose like a wave. People stood. Cameras flashed. My team smiled through tears. Jonathan nodded once, slow and full of something deeper than approval. When the governor cut the ribbon and the crowd surged forward, families rushed into the lobby where staff greeted them warmly. Children ran across the courtyard, chasing one another under the string lights that swayed in the breeze. A little girl tugged her mother's coat, pointing excitedly at the playroom. A man in his 60s wiped tears as he looked at the medical clinic. A single mother clutched the keys to her new unit like they were made of gold. The building came alive in a way that made my heart swell until it almost hurt. As people wandered through, exploring, laughing, taking photos, I stepped back into the corner of the courtyard and pressed a hand to my chest. I thought about the girl I once was, the girl freezing on a bench, the girl who gave away her last coat, the girl who had nothing, and I wished I could whisper to her, "You will not just survive. You will build places where others survive too." Jonathan appeared beside me quietly. Proud, he murmured. I nodded, unable to speak. "This is only the beginning," he said. "You are nowhere near finished." I let out a slow breath. I am ready for whatever comes next. And in that moment, with the sun warming my face and the sound of children filling the air, I knew I meant it. I felt them before I saw them, the way a shift in the air announces a storm long before the first drop falls. The dedication ceremony was still in full momentum when I stepped down from the podium and moved toward the reception area to greet donors and residents. Music drifted through the courtyard, soft guitar notes mingling with laughter and clinking cups. Reporters were gathering around Jonathan for interviews. The air buzzed with celebration. But something colder threaded through the warmth, a thin, almost invisible current that tightened the back of my neck. I turned slowly. Near the back of the crowd, half hidden behind a column of redwood beams, 3 familiar figures stood clustered together. My mother, my father, Blake. They looked so small from where I stood, not physically but in presence, like shadows of the people they once were. They wore clothes that didn't match the brightness of the day. My mother's coat was faded gray, the collar frayed from wear. Her hair, once meticulously styled, was pulled into a low bun that sagged unevenly. She held a small paper cup of coffee with both hands, as if she needed its warmth to stay upright. My father stood beside her wearing an old navy peacoat that hung too loose on his frame. His shoulders, once broad and imposing, seemed to curve inward as though carrying invisible weight. His face was lined not just with age, but with months of stress and sleeplessness. Blake stood slightly behind them, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his jaw tight. His once polished arrogance had melted into something hollow. Even from across the courtyard, I saw the dark circles under his eyes. He looked older than me now. They had not been invited. They had not checked in with staff. They had simply shown up, drawn to the event they had surely watched unfold on the news, perhaps shocked to see me at the center of something monumental. A few people nearby recognized them from the viral videos and began whispering among themselves. I exhaled slowly and walked toward them, not out of obligation, but out of clarity. It was time. As I approached, my mother noticed me first. Her breath hitched and the coffee cup trembled. My father stiffened his eyes, darting away, then back again, as if unsure he had the right to look at me. Blake stared at the ground, jaw twitching. I stopped a few feet in front of them, giving them space, but not surrendering mine. For several seconds, no one spoke. My mother broke first. "Elena," she whispered, and her voice cracked on the second syllable. She blinked rapidly, tears already gathering. "You look different." I offered no smile, no embrace, only a calm, steady presence. "What are you doing here?" The question was level, not cruel. My father swallowed hard. "We saw the news coverage. We wanted to see it for ourselves." My mother stepped forward slightly. "And we wanted to see you." Blake shifted uneasily, still refusing to lift his gaze. I waited, letting silence pry the truth from them. My mother took a deep breath. Her voice wavered. "We owe you an apology." The words hung in the air like fragile glass. My father finally met my eyes. "We failed you," he said quietly. "On Thanksgiving. And long before that." His voice cracked. "You deserved better than what we gave." Blake's jaw tightened again, but he forced himself to speak. "I messed up. With the videos. With everything. His voice was rough, uneven. I was angry and stupid and jealous. The last word escaped him reluctantly, like a confession he had never intended to make. I waited. My mother's tears spilled freely now. Elena, we lost everything. The house, the cars, the savings, friends, our reputation. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. But the thing that hurts the most is losing you. I inhaled slowly. I did not flinch. I did not soften. I simply stood steady. I forgive you. All three of them froze. My mother's breath caught audibly. My father's eyes glossed with sudden wetness. Blake's shoulders sagged slightly, a tiny collapse of tension. But I continued before they could misinterpret the meaning. I forgive you, but forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. My mother's expression faltered. Elena, please, she whispered. We have nothing left. We just want a chance to start over. I shook my head gently. Forgiveness means I no longer carry what you did to me. It does not mean I forget it. And it does not mean I open the door you closed. Blake finally lifted his eyes. They were red, swollen, exhausted. So that is it. You are done with us. I held his gaze steadily. I am done being hurt by you. That is different. My father stepped forward, desperation sharpening his voice. Elena, we are your family. You cannot just walk away. A faint, bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. That is exactly what you did, on a freezing night, without hesitation, without remorse. I watched the truth hit them like a cold wind. I pointed toward the buildings surrounding us. This place exists because of that night, because you showed me I had to save myself, and now hundreds of families will never feel what I felt. My mother pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks. We are so sorry, she whispered through them. I nodded. I believe that. But sorry does not rebuild everything that was broken. It only acknowledges it. And sometimes acknowledgement is all that is possible. A long silence fell between us, heavy but strangely peaceful. Finally, I stepped back a single pace. I have work to do. I wish you healing. But I am not returning to that version of family. My mother reached out as if to touch my arm, but stopped herself inches away. My father looked like he wanted to speak again, but no words came. Blake lowered his gaze once more. I turned and walked away, each step steady, grounded, free. Behind me, I heard my mother's soft sob. I did not turn around, not out of cruelty, out of choice, out of boundaries finally respected. As I rejoined the celebration, the noise and music wrapped around me like warm air after a long winter. A resident handed their new keys to a staff member with a grin so wide it lit the courtyard. A child tugged at Jonathan's sleeve, excitedly pointing at the rooftop greenhouse. Laughter rose like sunlight between the buildings. I stood among them, not as someone running from her past, but as someone walking firmly into her future. The rain began as a thin mist, almost invisible, drifting across the plaza as the ceremony wound down and the crowd thinned to clusters of lingering families and volunteers. The sky had shifted from bright blue to a muted steel gray, as though the weather itself understood that celebration had given way to something softer, quieter, more solemn. I stood beneath the overhang of the main entrance, greeting a final wave of guests as they filtered out through the courtyard gates. Children clutched their new backpacks. Parents held packets of housing resources. Reporters packed their equipment. The air buzzed with gratitude and hope. Yet beneath the warmth of the moment, something heavier tugged at me, pulling my gaze inevitably toward the far corner of the plaza. My family had not left yet. They lingered near the rain-puddled edge of the courtyard, half-sheltered beneath a maple tree whose red leaves trembled in the wind. The storm had deepened slightly, tiny droplets shimmering in their hair and soaking into the fabric of their worn coats. They looked unsure whether they were allowed to leave or expected to stay. My mother stared at her shoes. My father watched the horizon. Blake paced restlessly, rubbing the back of his neck. Something inside me tightened, not with anger, not with fear, with finality. I excused myself from the last group of guests and walked toward the entrance of the building. Jonathan stood just inside the glass doors speaking to a donor, but his eyes flicked briefly to me as I approached. He gave me a subtle nod, a wordless acknowledgement that he knew what this moment was. Then he stepped aside, giving me space. I turned toward the doorway. The automatic sensors hummed softly as the tall, redwood-framed doors slid open for me, bathing the threshold in warm, golden light. Behind me, I heard footsteps, slow, hesitant, familiar. I did not turn, not yet. I looked out across the plaza one last time. My family remained under the maple tree, their silhouettes blurred faintly by the fine drizzle. My mother lifted her head at that moment. For a brief second, our eyes met from across the distance. Her face crumpled not dramatically, but with the quiet devastation of someone realizing they had reached the edge of a road that no longer extended in their direction. My father placed a hand on her shoulder. He looked older than I had ever seen him, as if life had hollowed him out from the inside. Blake held still for once, his restless pacing stopping as he stared at me with an expression I couldn't fully decipher. Regret, exhaustion, maybe something like comprehension. The wind rustled the leaves overhead. The rain deepened. I felt the moment crystallize inside me like a bead of glass. I stepped back through the open doorway. The warm air enveloped me instantly, carrying the faint scent of cedar and fresh paint. The lights above cast a soft glow on the polished floor. It felt like stepping into a sanctuary I had built with my own hands. My family did not move toward me. They simply watched. Maybe they understood something essential had shifted. Maybe they finally realized this was not a punishment. This was a boundary. A door that had closed the moment they threw me out into the cold, and which I had spent years learning how to rebuild without the cracks of old pain. I inhaled slowly. Then I let the breath go. My voice came out steady quiet, but firm enough for them to hear across the plaza. "Take care of yourselves." My mother's hand fluttered toward her chest. My father bowed his head. Blake opened his mouth, then closed it again. I lifted my chin, turned inward, and took another step into the building. As the sensors detected I had moved far enough inside, the doors began to slide shut behind me. The sound was soft, barely a whisper, yet it echoed through me like a closing chapter. The last thing I saw before the doors met in the middle was the three of them standing together beneath the shivering maple leaves, the rain falling harder now, streaking their silhouettes into blurred shapes. Then the doors sealed with a muted click. Warmth wrapped around me fully. Silence settled. I did not lean against the wall. I did not cry. I simply stood there, breathing in the clean scent of a space built for new beginnings. Jonathan approached after a moment, not intruding, only stepping close enough to speak in a low voice. "It is done." I nodded. "Yes." He studied my face, searching for traces of doubt. "Do you regret it?" I thought deeply. Images flickered in my mind. The Thanksgiving night porch, the cold bench, the trembling old man who changed everything, the motel room, the long months rebuilding both my life and myself, the projects, the families, the speeches, the future unfolding in front of me like an open path, and the three figures in the rain outside tied to a past I had already outgrown. "No," I said finally. "I do not." Jonathan's expression softened into something between relief and quiet pride. "Good, then let us move forward." He walked with me down the hallway, our footsteps echoing lightly on the floor. Staff members congratulated me as they passed, their smiles bright and genuine. In every face I saw the life I had chosen, the life I deserved. We reached the atrium where sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching flecks of dust that danced gently in the warm air. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the playroom down the hall. A resident waved to me from an elevator full of packed boxes and wide-eyed hope. I waved back. For the first time in a long time, the ache that once lived in my chest felt replaced by something expansive and light. Space. Peace. Closure. The kind that does not roar, but settles softly like fresh snow covering a scarred landscape. I paused at the window, looking out at the courtyard. Rain still fell steadily, blurring the outlines of the world outside. My family had vanished from view, not erased, not forgotten, simply no longer standing at the center of my story. I whispered, not to them, not to Jonathan, but to the woman I used to be. "You did it. You walked through a door they slammed in your face. And you built a better one. The automatic doors remained closed behind me, sealing the campus in warm light and renewed purpose. A door had shut, a life had opened, and I walked on. The rain eased into a gentle drizzle by late afternoon, the kind that softened edges and made everything shimmer as if the world had been freshly washed. The courtyard glowed beneath rows of warm string lights that flickered on automatically as dusk approached. The celebration had officially ended hours ago, but the echo of laughter still lingered in the air, drifting between the new buildings like a memory refusing to fade. I walked slowly through the lobby, taking in the details that had once existed only inside planning documents. The polished floors, the soft, neutral walls, the scent of cedar still clinging to the beams. The quiet hum of families settling into their new units. It felt surreal to stand in a place that had taken years of disciplined heartbreak and resilience to bring into existence. My heels clicked softly as I approached the main doors again. I wasn't sure why. Maybe part of me wanted one last look at the world outside the threshold before fully stepping into this new life. As I reached the glass, a small tug at my sleeve made me stop. I turned. A boy about 6 years old stood beside me, curly hair damp from the rain, cheeks flushed with excitement. He wore a bright red Spider-Man jacket, several sizes too big for him, as if someone had donated it with hopeful generosity. His wide eyes blinked up at me. "Are you the lady who built this place?" His voice was small but eager, the kind of voice that carried innocence and gratitude in equal measure. I crouched down so we were eye level. "I am one of them," I said with a smile. His grin widened. He held out his hand. In his palm rested a damp yellow maple leaf edges curled slightly from the rain. "For you," he said, "because you gave us a home." Something inside me cracked open. A soft, warm ache bloomed in my chest. I accepted the leaf gently as though it were a fragile piece of glass. "Thank you," I whispered. "It is beautiful." The boy beamed, then darted off toward the playroom where other children were already gathering. Their laughter rose in bright spirals that echoed through the hallway. I stood slowly holding the leaf to my chest. That single small gesture felt heavier than any award or plaque. It felt like the universe handing me a conclusion written in quiet handwriting. A moment later, Jonathan appeared beside me, hands folded behind his back, watching the boy rejoin his friends. "Children carry truth better than adults," he murmured. "They see what matters." I nodded, still clutching the leaf. I never imagined moments like this. He turned to me with a look that held both pride and something gentler. "That is because you spent your life surviving. Now you are living." I let out a breath, one that seemed to release years of tightness I had grown accustomed to holding. The rain outside had nearly stopped, leaving droplets scattered across the courtyard like tiny mirrors. Through the glass, I could see new residents walking between the buildings, exploring their surroundings, slowly absorbing the reality of safety. A woman held her baby close while pointing toward a garden bed that would soon grow herbs and vegetables. A teenager tested the Wi-Fi on his phone with a grin. An elderly man with a walker admired the ramp that allowed him to move freely without strain. They were building beginnings here, beginnings that did not depend on cruelty or validation or conditions, beginnings that felt like clean air. Jonathan watched me as if reading the thoughts passing behind my eyes. "Ready for the next chapter?" he asked. This time, the question did not scare me. It grounded me. I nodded. "Yes." Finally, yes. He stepped closer, resting a hand briefly on my shoulder. "You earned all of this." I shook my head gently. "No, I built all of this." He smiled at the correction. "Fair enough." A soft silence settled between us. Not the heavy silence of the past, but the peaceful kind found only after a storm has passed and the air feels new. After a moment, I turned away from the door and walked deeper into the building. Each step felt deliberate, anchored in a sense of self that had taken years to reclaim. I passed the community kitchen where volunteers stacked pans onto shelves. I passed the family lounge where a toddler was chasing a stuffed bear across the carpet while his mother laughed. I passed the clinic hallway where nurses set up charts for opening day. Every doorway revealed life beginning. Not perfectly, Not magically, but solidly. And sometimes that was better. At the far end of the atrium, I paused near the long wall of windows. Outside, the last streaks of sunset painted the sky in soft watercolor hues of peach lavender and silver. The rain had stopped completely. The buildings reflected in puddles like quiet twins. I touched the leaf still in my hand. I thought of the girl I once was, the one who stumbled into the night with nothing but a bruised shoulder and a broken heart. The one who handed her last coat to a freezing stranger without hesitation. The one who survived not because she was strong at the time, but because something inside refused to let kindness die. I closed my eyes and whispered a truth into the softening air. You are not disposable. You never were. When I opened my eyes again, the world felt lighter. I slipped the maple leaf into the pocket of my blazer and walked toward the elevators. A resident rushed past me with a bundle of blankets and offered a shy smile. A staff member gave me a thumbs up. Jonathan called something from down the hall about a meeting next week. Life moved forward around me in a graceful swirl, and I moved with it. As the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside, feeling the gentle hum of the machine beneath my feet. This was not the ending of my story. It was the beginning of the life I had spent years building from the ashes of the one that had been taken from me. As the doors slid shut and the warm air wrapped around me, a quiet certainty settled deep inside. I had walked through a new door, one I created, and I would never look back at the old one again. The future waited upstairs, and this time I walked toward it with open hands. If you stayed with me until the end of this story, I want to speak to you directly because I know something about you already. People who finish stories like this are often the ones who have walked through a kind of quiet darkness that does not leave visible scars but changes the way you breathe and move through the world. Maybe you know what it is like to sit in a cold room or a lonely apartment or a parked car and wonder why the people who were supposed to love you could turn their backs when you needed them most. Maybe you know what it feels like to be treated as if you were disposable, as if your worth could be measured by your usefulness instead of your heart. If you have ever been there, then hear me when I say this. You are not alone, and you are not the sum of what someone else failed to see. I spent years believing I was the problem, years thinking if I worked harder, spoke softer, succeeded more pleased, more bent myself into 1,000 impossible shapes, maybe then I would be enough for the people who were supposed to love me without conditions. But sometimes the people you are born to are not the people who will lift you up. Sometimes the family you were given is not the family you are meant to keep. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is closing the door that keeps hurting you and walking toward one that leads to warmth, safety, and a life shaped by your own choices. If you are watching this right now and you are carrying old wounds or fresh ones or the kind of pain you do not tell anyone about, I want you to know something simple but powerful. Kindness matters. Not the kind you perform to please others, but the kind that comes from deep inside you, the kind you give even when you are hurting, the kind that proves your heart survived what should have broken it. That kind of kindness can change the direction of your life. It changed mine. And if you have that inside you, even if you feel like you have nothing else, you have more than you think. I also want to ask you for something. If you have ever been abandoned by your own family, ignored when you needed help, or forced to rebuild your life from the ground up, tell me your story in the comments. You do not have to share details if you do not want to. Just leave your city and a few words like, I have been there, or I know this pain. I want to see how far your voices travel and how many people out there survived the same cold nights and built themselves into something stronger. And if you are someone who walked away from a toxic home and created a life that feels like peace, I want you to drop your city too so someone else reading can see what healing looks like years later. Maybe someone scrolling through the comments tonight needs to know that leaving does not make you heartless. It makes you brave. And maybe they need to know that the door slammed in their face might be the very thing that leads them to a new one filled with light and possibility. If you found yourself in any part of this story, I hope you remember this long after the video ends. You are not disposable. You are not a burden. You do not exist to be someone else's punching bag, scapegoat, or safety net. You deserve warmth. You deserve respect. You deserve a home that feels like home. And sometimes that home begins with a single decision to walk towards something better. So tell me where you are watching from. Tell me you made it. Tell me you survived. And if you are still in the cold, I hope this story is the light that helps you find your way out.